Hello, and thank you for joining today's Rev Up Virginia September 4th webinar. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode and webcams are disabled. Card captioning is available during today's session and can be accessed via the captioning feature in Zoom or via the external link that will be placed in chat. ASL is also being provided and is on your screen. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please utilize the chat feature and direct all questions to the questions host. To ask a verbal question during the designated Q&A segment, please raise your hand and the moderator will call your name to ask you to unmute. If possible, please enable your webcam while speaking during the Q&A. This call is being recorded. And it is now my pleasure to turn the call over to Helena Berger. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Again, I am Helena Berger, co-founder and co-chair of Rev Up Virginia. And can we please move to the next slide? I think it's going to be 2 slides, actually. Next slide, please. Great. On the screen, for those who may not be able to see it, is a photo of myself and my co-chair student, Susan Leidick. We are with a student from George Mason University holding a sign that says, "I vote because." And we also have on the screen the Rev Up Virginia logo, which is red, white, and blue. It says, "Make the disability vote count." It has an image of the state of Virginia, and it says, "Rev Up Virginia, register, educate, vote, use your power." Next slide, please. Oh, and I just before we launch into our presentation, some of you may have heard the unfortunate and tragic breaking news that we've had another school shooting. This happened at a high school in Georgia. Apparently, there appears to be loss of life. So Rev Up Virginia and all of us today, presenters, our hearts go out to the families who are impacted by this tragedy. And we also send our best wishes to our colleagues at Rev Up Georgia. Rev Up Virginia, which stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power, is a nonpartisan voter education and engagement coalition. Our mission is to increase the political power and influence of the disability vote to help bring meaningful change to the lives of disabled Virginians and their families. Next slide, please. I did fail to also just give you a brief description of myself. I apologize for that. My pronouns are her and she. I have light brown hair. I am wearing glasses. And I have a gray shirt on, and the background, my screen is blue with the Rev Up logo. So again, I apologize for not doing that initially. The Rev Up Coalition meets on the first Thursday of every month at 4 p.m. via Zoom to pull together the disability community and our allies. We work to ensure that in Virginia, the disability vote counts. If you'd like to know more about how to be part of our coalition, you can reach out to us via email at revupvirginia, that's REVUP, Virginia spelled out, at gmail.com. And you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, obviously formerly Twitter. Next slide, please. The next 2 slides I'm going to present provide some revealing and very encouraging statistics on the growing disability vote. The slide in front of us provides a few national statistics. Between the 2018 and 2022 midterm elections, voter turnout for disabled individuals increased by 1.6 points, but for non-disabled individuals at that same amount, 1.6 points. This caused a disability turnout gap to increase from 4.8 points in 2018 to 1.5 points in 2022. This increased turnout occurred across all disability types and demographic categories, including gender, race, ethnicity, age group, and region, and was especially pronounced among young disabled voters. An estimated 15.8 million disabled citizens reported voting, and that was all the good news. The bad news is, unfortunately, 14%, or approximately 2.2 million disabled voters, had some type of difficulty in voting, which is more than 3 times the rate among non-disabled voters. Next slide, please. This slide is some specific statistics pertaining to Virginia. The number of adults in Virginia with a disability is 1.9 million. This is equal to 29%, or about 1 in 4 adults in Virginia. The number of disabled Virginians that were projected eligible to vote in the November 2020 election was 939,000. That's over 15% of the total Virginia electorate. FYI, an estimated 38 million disabled Americans were eligible to vote in the 2020 election. And then the last stat, which is by far my most favorite stat, and I think probably the most powerful and impactful, is that disabled and non-disabled Virginians voted at the same rate, which was 53.2% in the 2022 midterm election. Again, that was disabled and non-disabled Virginians voted at the same rate. These stats clearly demonstrate that the disability vote exists, is growing, and has the potential to influence the outcome of elections. In this critical election year, we need to remind our elected officials and those running for office to address the concerns of their disabled constituents and recognize the power of our vote, especially when so many races are being decided by razor-thin majorities. We have the power to make a difference on November 5th. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Nicole Davis. Next slide, please.
Thank you. My name is Nicole Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Independent Living in Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm also the Secretary of the Virginia Associations for Centers for Independent Living, called VACIL. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a Hispanic woman with brown curly hair and blonde highlights, black thick-rimmed glasses that I think are awesome, and a fun royal blue dress. On the screen, you have a picture of VACIL's logo, which is the state of Virginia, and stars where all the Centers for Independent Living are, the logo and the name, as well as a picture of me. In this picture, I am wearing a black shirt that is printed with white bows, and I have with me my then service dog, Anya, who is a huge source of joy and asset to me, and she was a black and gray German Shepherd. I greatly appreciate Rev Up for inviting VACIL to be a part of this. And we're going to talk about what Centers for Independent Living are and what are some of the laws that have been done, because it is important that you know about not only how to vote and what it means to vote, but all the advocacy and history that was done that allowed for people with disabilities to do just that, use their voice. Next slide. So I said I'm a part of VACIL, and I'll go ahead and explain what exactly VACIL is. VACIL, or the Virginia Association for Centers for Independent Living, is a statewide association of Centers for Independent Living that advocates for the integration and inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of life. The association also promotes the professional development, improvement, and expansion of community-based, consumer-controlled Centers for Independent Living, which are often called CILS for short, CILS. And it promotes community education throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. That sounds like a lot. Well, I think a great way to think about that is to look at what the Virginia Association Centers for Independent Living mission is, or I'm just going to call it VACIL for short, because that is a mouthful. The mission is to ensure that people with disabilities have a community-based, consumer-directed service delivery system. So VASIL, being statewide, advocates and works towards that to make sure that people with disabilities have what is needed in their community so that they can live the life that they want. Next slide. So what I have on the screen is just that, a picture of the state of Virginia and all the centers for independent living that there are. We have separated the state by the planning districts. And as you can see, each planning district, or most of the planning districts, have a shade of color, be it pink, green, royal blue, purple, yellow, but there are some districts that don't have any color. Those are 9, 13, 14, and 7. And so the white areas are the areas that are unserved, meaning that there's not a center for independent living in that area. VASIL is working very hard to ensure that every area, every Virginian with a disability has access to a center for independent living. If you're concerned or wonder what exactly Center for Independent Living is in your area, I encourage you to go to vasil.org. That is VACIL.org, O-R-G. It has this map, but it also allows you to click and see what Center for Independent Living serves your area, what the contact information is, what their website, and allows you to find out a little bit more about the work that we do. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so I've talked about VASIL and how they're a statewide independent living for Centers for Independent Living. I might as well tell you what a Center for Independent Living is. So, CILs, Centers for Independent Living, are led by people with disabilities and are unique nonprofits that serve people with disabilities. I want to let that sit for a minute. They're nonprofits that are led by people with disabilities, providing services for people with disabilities. So your local Center for Independent Living understands disability from a personal but also professional level. They get the barriers that exist because oftentimes they themselves are engaging, dealing, advocating with those very same barriers. CILs are unique. They're non-residential. We like to stress that because oftentimes people hear the name independent living and assume that people live at the centers. Nobody lives at a center. We like the name independent living because that's what we're working towards, ensuring that all people with disabilities can live a life that they're proud of. They're organizations that provide persons with disabilities of all ages and all types a variety of services that allow them to obtain or maintain their desired level of independence. That's what centers are working for, to ensure that people can live the life that they want to. They also provide advocacy because oftentimes our communities are not necessarily have all the services and supports that exist that allow us to live our desired level of independence. At a minimum, 51% of the staff are persons with disabilities and 51% of the board of directors are persons with significant disabilities. So Centers for Independent Living understand the needs, the barriers, the supports of people with disabilities from the top down. That's kind of just who we are and what we do. Next slide. So I've talked a lot about VASIL and centers. Now I'm going to talk about voting and disability law. I think when you think about voting and what it means, it's important to look to see what has been done so you can identify what still needs to happen. So I'm just going to go over some important and key laws. In 1984, we had the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act. This required accessible polling places in federal elections or an alternative means of voting on election day. So before 1984, there was not a law that said that people with disabilities polling places needed to be accessible. So at that point, there could be stairs. They might not provide it in an accessible format, things like that. So before that, could have been a big barrier for people with disabilities to vote. Then in 1990, we got the Americans with Disabilities Act, often called the ADA. It is a federal civil rights law that provides protections to people with disabilities. I'm going to talk primarily about Title II, but there are 5 titles within the Americans with Disability Act. And if you want to know more about what this means, I encourage you to reach out to your Centers for Independent Living. They can help provide guidance, support, because each title is so unique and it covers so much. But Title II requires state and local government, often referred to as a public entity, to ensure that people with disabilities have a full and equal opportunity to vote. Now, the ADA's provisions apply to all aspects of voting, including voter registration, site selection, casting of ballots, and whether an election day or during an early voting process. So the ADA kind of covered before, middle, and after. That's what they were looking for. So it was an addendum, a way to make sure that we could remove the barriers that potentially were there. Next slide. But then we have 1993, the National Voter Registration Act. They realized that though we had the two laws before, that they did not have a ton of people with disabilities registering. So this law was passed, or this act was passed, to increase the historically low registration rates of people with disabilities. And it required all offices that provide public assistance or state-funded programs to provide an opportunity to register to vote in a federal election. So that was a chance for them to be like, okay, we need to step it up. And they went and passed this act to make sure that not only voting was accessible, but registering to vote, because that's often the very place we start, is with registering. And then in 2002, HAVA for short, but the Help America Vote Act requires that sites that hold federal elections to provide an accessible voting machine for people with disabilities at each polling place. And later on in the slideshow, we do have a picture of what an accessible machine looks like, so you can kind of put the two together. The accessible voting system must provide the same opportunity for access and participation, including privacy and independence, that other voters receive. They wanted to make sure that they had a place where people with disabilities could vote with the privacy and independence that everyone wants when they go forward and make this decision, because it is something that is important to you, and you don't necessarily want to have to tell everybody who you're voting for, because that's not something everybody does. And so this act really helped reinforce that. Next slide. And now I'm going to talk about a change that we are experiencing in Virginia today. So starting July 1st, 2024, any voter with a disability can vote without leaving their vehicle. So any person with a disability or anyone who is 65 years or older can curbside vote. So if you do want to vote, and the idea of going into the building and having to deal with all that is something that maybe just not wanting to deal with, is not something you're wanting to look forward to, curbside voting is now an option. If you would like to use curbside voting, make sure to use the designated parking space at your polling location and follow any instructions on the signage that they have. We do have on the slide a picture of what that signage could look like. I call them open close signs, kind of like a mouth. It's black and it has curbside voting for assistance call and then a phone number. So if you are looking to curbside vote, please look for these signs, because oftentimes they give you the information of who to call and help you navigate where to go, so that you're not showing up going, okay, I'm supposed to curbside vote, but do what? And so we do think it's important that you look for the sign, you know where to go, so that when you do go to vote, you go to vote with the confidence and assurance that you have to know what to do and where to go. I want to thank Rev Up for giving Basel the opportunity to participate in this. And then I'm going to turn it over to Miss Janet Boyd, who's really going to get into the details about what is needed to go ahead and rock and roll and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. That was a great introduction, and I'm just going to sort of follow through with what you've already learned from Nicole with a bit more details. But my name is Janet Boyd, and I serve as the Director of Voter Services for the League of Women Voters of Virginia. I am a somewhat older female, she, her pronouns, with gray hair, and I wear glasses. I also serve as an election official at polling sites for Arlington County. Next slide, please. So this is a slide I really enjoy because I'm proud of it. It states that voting in Virginia has come a long way. Our graphic shows a voter in a wheelchair with a ballot in their hand. Now, I'll explain why this claim is true, because I really do believe we've made some great progress. Quite a bit of it is based on federal law, but a lot of it is based on recent Virginia law, which has provided a lot more for our people with disabilities. So next slide, please. So this slide has a lot of information on it, but I'm going to focus on a few highlights from it. Because it provides what tools you have available to you to ensure that your voting experience is actually accessible. The Virginia Department of Elections describes these tools on their website, which is on this slide, and that's elections.virginia.gov/accessible. And then below on this slide is a lot of different items from that website, and I'm going to highlight a few of those. First, any person, regardless of their disability, has a right to register to vote at any office or agency that provides that service. You don't have to go just like to your registrar, for example. If registration is available at other locations, which it is, and I'll go to that shortly, you must be accommodated. Second, Virginia law states that a person with cognitive disabilities can be denied access to voting only if a judge has adjudicated that that person is mentally incapacitated. I wanted to highlight that the League is working on new legislation to clarify that the ruling must focus on voting specifically. There's been some questions with regard to adjudication and whether it covers just other things other than voting, or does it actually cover voting? So more on that, hopefully, after the session that starts in January. Third, you do have many options for registering to vote. You should pick the option that works best for you. And I'm going to give you sort of this list on the slide does indicate a number of different locations, and I'll highlight them for you. You can go online and you use the Department of Elections Citizens Portal, and we'll talk more about the Citizens Portal shortly. You can also register by mail, and on the Department of Elections website, you can download the form and fill it out by hand, and also there are a number of ways that you can go ahead and send it, and you'll get the instructions on the website for that. You can also go to your local registrar's office. They have to make it accessible for you. You can find the address for your local registrar by going on the Department of Election website. That office, again, must accommodate your special needs. At a number of government offices, you can also register. For example, you can go to certain state and local offices other than your registrar's office. And you might be visiting these offices for other reasons, and they have to make registration available for you. And just to give you an example of some of these locations, you can go to the Department of Health, or VDH, the Department of Social Services, which is DSS, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, which is the DBHDS. I'm giving you the initials just in case that's how you know them by. Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, which is DARS. The Department for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, which is VDDHH. And the Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired, which is DBVI. You might also be able to go to your local public library. They should have the forms available there. And as well as if you have any reason to be going to the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles to change your address, or otherwise get a driver's license or a Virginia ID, they also give you an opportunity at that time to also register to vote, or to say that you don't want to register to vote. Next slide, please. So this slide focuses on that there is a deadline for when you need to register to vote. And the deadline for the November election is October 15th, 2024. So it's coming up in a short while. But you can also register to vote after this date with a fairly new law in Virginia called same-day registration. And you can do same-day registration if you vote in person and at your location that you will vote, whether it's early voting or voting on election day. You're allowed to actually register to vote like anyone else, but you will have to put your ballot in a special envelope that's called a provisional envelope, and your local registrar and the electoral board will review your application to register to vote. And if it's accepted, then your ballot gets accepted at that time. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, the citizen portal for the Department of Election is a very important resource for you. And on this slide, we have the actual link to the site, and that is elections.virginia.gov/citizen, CITIZEN -portal, PORTAL. And on this slide, this is what we have is sort of a screenshot of what it looks like when you go to that website. And it has 4 different buttons, and you will press the button that gives you the service that you need from the Department of Elections. So the 4 buttons, the first one allows you to register to vote, as we discussed before. You can do that the way you do it online. The second button is you can actually check your registration status. And this could be very important, particularly if you have moved recently, to make sure that they do have your correct address. The third button is if you want to or need to find where your polling place is located. And then finally, the last button is this is how you'd apply to vote absentee by mail. And we'll talk a little bit more shortly about what it means to vote absentee by mail. But I want to emphasize, and this is on the slide as well, is that to be able to use the citizen portal, you have to have either a driver's license, a Virginia driver's license, or a Virginia ID, both of which are available through the DMV. You can't do it if you don't have either of those, but we'll talk about some alternatives that you can have to get information, even if you don't have that kind of ID or driver's license. Next slide, please. So this slide talks about what you can do if you're not able to register online because you don't have the appropriate form of either ID or driver's license. You can actually go to the Department of Elections website, which has all these same forms in links to them, so you can print them at home. And let me give you that website, and that's https://www.elections.virginia.gov. And remember, that first part that I just gave you is the general website for the Department of Elections. And then for the forms, you go /registration/voter-forms. So from there, you can pick out the forms you need, whether you need a registration form or a form for absentee voting, which we will discuss in just a few minutes. So let's go to the next slide. So now that you've registered, the issue is, how do you actually vote? And what are the options available to you if you have disabilities? And so there are 2 principal ways in Virginia, and quite frankly, this is pretty much across the nation, of how you can cast your ballot. And the first way is in person. The second way is absentee. The in-person way is probably something that you're familiar with. In fact, you might be very familiar with what absentee is as well. But I did want to point out with in-person that early voting, and this is early voting in person, begins 45 days before Election Day. It's quite long in Virginia. And that is September 20th, 2024. The Election Day, of course, is November 5th, 2024. And I'll talk to you later exactly what days during that 45-day period that you can vote in person and where you will be able to vote. For absentee is kind of a strange concept, or at least it's a strange term to use for a very liberal process. In the past, there were restrictions on when you could actually vote absentee. You had to have an excuse, et cetera, et cetera. Not anymore. if you want to vote from home, you're allowed to vote from home in Virginia. You have to request, however, this ballot, and the ballot will be mailed to you by October 25th, 2024, if you want to vote in the November election. And I just want to emphasize the sooner the better, because if you're going to be, particularly if you're going to be using the mail service, and you do have to use the mail service to actually get the mail ballot, you have to rely on the mail service. And we are all quite concerned about whether or not the mail service is as reliable as we would really like it to be. So I would just encourage you that if you want to vote absentee or have the ballot actually mailed to you, you need to request the absentee ballot form as soon as you possibly can, fill it out and mail it as the instructions that you get when you get the mail ballot, or when you get the form. The mailing of ballots, if you've made this request, the ballots are going to be mailed to you from your registrar, your local registrar, starting September 20th. So again, it's the same day that early voting starts. They start sending out the ballots to, or mail the ballots to your home if you have actually requested it through the absentee form. Then you have the opportunity to fill it out and you can return your ballot, but you need to make sure that you return your ballot before or by or before election day. And we'll talk in a minute about what this all means and what your options are on what to do with your ballot once you get it and have completed it. So next slide, please. So this slide is talking about voter identification or voter IDs. This is a hotly debated subject, not only in other parts of the United States, but certainly in Virginia. It is fairly recently that the requirement to have an actual photo ID, no matter what, has been lessened recently in Virginia, and I'll go through the various options you have. Because right now you do have quite a number of options that you can use, but there is a voter identification requirement, and I'll explain what this means other than being a photo identification. First, the Virginia allows you to actually use various IDs like this. The confirmation documents that you receive from your registrar or the Department of Elections after you register to vote. So when you register to vote, you'll be mailed some information from your registrar, and you can use that sheet of paper, or it's usually on a little strip. You can use that to vote. You can also use your Virginia driver's license, and it can even be expired. You can use your Virginia DMV issued ID card. Remember, we were talking about those for accessing the Citizens Portal. You can use that to be able to vote in person, and even that ID can be expired. You can use your US passport. It can't be expired. It's got to be current. And you can use any other ID that you may have received if issued by the state of Virginia or the US government, such as a military ID or even an ID that you might have received if you're in a government nursing home. And there's other government issued IDs that you can use as well. You can also use your employee ID, but it has to have your photo. You can use a student ID, and the student IDs can generally be digital if that's how your school actually officially issues your ID. And if it's from a Virginia public or a private high school or a US institution of higher education, even if it's outside of Virginia, it has to have your photo. But if it's in Virginia, it does not have to have your photo. You can also use, and I've seen this a lot as an election official, is that people will bring in their current utility bill, bank statement, government check, or other government document, so long as it lists your name and address and is not more than 12 months old. And that can be digital as well. So let's say you don't have any of those. You can also, when you come to vote, you can fill out this ID confirmation statement, and it basically confirms, or you're saying that you are who you are, and you have to sign that document. If you sign the document and you're not who you are, then you're subject to persecution. So it's intended to be a very serious document and not something to just assume that it's an easy thing to abuse. So next slide, please. So this is what Nicole was talking about, is accessible voting. And what we're talking about this is when you're talking about in-person voting. We're still in that category. And on this slide is a picture of a voter using an accessible voting machine, similar to what Nicole was discussing. And it has a screen on it. It also has earphones. So a oral transcript is actually given to the voter so they know how to vote. And also the voter is given a finger pad that they can use to actually mark their ballot through the accessible machine. This has to be located in every polling location, and that means it'll be at your registrar's office during early voting. It will be also at any of the satellite locations during early voting that your registrar might have set up. So you can have access to that no matter what your disability might be, or even if you don't have a disability. The election officers are given instructions that this is an accessible voting machine for whatever reason. And I know I've had a number of voters to come in that want to use it because they have difficulty either on their hands, or they just want to be able to view the ballot in a much larger print than would be the print that you get on a paper ballot. So it's a good opportunity for anyone to use, and you should ask for it if you feel like it's going to be easy, make it easier for you to vote. So next slide, please. So on this slide, we are discussing some more options available to make sure that your voting is accessible to you personally. And so this slide does list a number of items that are required at every polling location. And the laws that Nicole mentioned in her presentation, in most part, are the reason why every location in Virginia must have these specific items. And I'm going to go through with them, or at least describe each one of them. The first is accessible parking spaces. They have to be set aside at the polling locations for anybody that has a card that says that they have a right to use those parking spaces. Second, we and Nicole talked about this, is every polling location has to have curbside voting, and it's for voters with both mental or physical disabilities or age 65 plus. So the requirement to have mental disabilities on this list is brand new, and we're real excited about that, as Nicole had mentioned. Each polling location must also have signs showing that there is an accessible entrance and a route in the building that is accessible. There also needs to be an accessible voting booth with a chair. Each place must also have seating available for voters waiting to vote, plus sufficient space for voters in wheelchairs. Notepads have to be available so the voters can communicate with the election officers in writing. There also needs to be a magnifier for reading election material and the ballot. And we do see voters use that a lot, but also, as I mentioned before, the voting machine, the accessible voting machine, is another option because it does allow you to have a much larger print than you do on most ballots. So we also have a graphic on this slide that just emphasizes that voters with disabilities have options. And to just reiterate the Department of Elections website that focuses on what options you have. And again, that's www.elections.virginia.gov, which is the General Department of Elections website /accessible. So next slide, please. So there are many ways to mark your ballot. We've been focusing primarily on marking your ballot at a polling location, but there are a number of other ways that you can mark your ballot that might make it much easier for you. And so I wanted to review 3 primary options that you should be considering when you're making your plan to vote. And the first is just the traditional pen and paper. Every polling location, and plus the absentee voting that we talked about, every polling location in Virginia must have paper ballots. And the paper ballots require you to use a pen to fill out ovals. And again, that is the same ballot that would be sent to you if you request an absentee ballot. Second, you can use the accessible voting machine that we just discussed at your polling place. And then finally, if you do have a home device, you can request when you're requesting a ballot to be mailed to you, you can on that form, you can indicate that you want to have a email sent to you, which will provide you with the link to be able to get the ballot through your home device. And then you can use that home device, which may be similar to an accessible device at the polling location, but it's made personal for you. You can use that to actually mark your ballot. However, your ballot still has to be printed and it still has to be mailed to your registrar. All those instructions will be provided by the registrar when they provide you the link to be able to download the ballot on your personal device. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there's been quite a bit of discussion about internet voting, but currently in Virginia, there is no internet voting. So next slide, please. So if you need assistance in Virginia, you have a right to ask for assistance. And when I'm saying assistance, this is assistance through an individual. If you vote in person, an election officer can help you. You can ask for the election officer to help you, or you can bring your own assistance. In both cases, there will be a form to fill out. Your assistant, whether it's the election officer or somebody of your own choice, has to fill out part of the form, and then you will fill out the other part of the form, and you both will sign it, and then the election officer will give it back to the registrar. If you want to vote absentee or vote at home, you must request when you send out a request for your mailed ballot, there will be a place on there that you can check mark that you actually need to have assistance. And in that case, the registrar, when they send you your mailed ballot, will also send to you a form that very similar to what you would fill out if you voted in person. And again, it requires your assistant to sign and fill out some information and you to do the same. Next slide, please. So we're coming down to home stretch here. And I just want to reiterate some tips to make sure that you are successful in voting in November. So first, as we talked about, all voting is done primarily on a piece of paper that you write on. It could be that you make a mistake. And if you do make a mistake, you do have a right to ask for an additional ballot. This does mean that you should be starting this process, particularly if you're going to have a mailed ballot, as soon as possible, because if you do make a mistake, another ballot will have to be mailed to you, and that takes time. The instructions that you get with your mailed ballot from your registrar will explain what you need to do if you make a mistake on your ballot. Your ballot must be returned or postmarked by election day. So in other words, There are various ways to return your ballot, and I'll get to that shortly. But you do have to have it returned or postmarked on election day, November 5th. You can return a mail ballot, and this is where we get into this idea of that you do have some options with your mail ballot. You can return it by mail, like I discussed, but if you're going to do it by mail, you really should put it in the mailbox a couple of weeks before election day to just make sure that there's no problem with it arriving. There is a deadline in Virginia that the mail ballot, even if it's postmarked on election day appropriately, it still has to arrive at your registrar's office by the Friday after the election by noon. So you don't want to have any problems by trying to delay sending it by mail. The other option, let's just posit that you don't want to use the mail system, is drop-off boxes. Every polling place on election day will have a drop-off box. During the entire time period of early voting, starting September 20th, there is a drop box available at your registrar's office. And many localities also have drop boxes circulated in various places like public libraries and things of that nature. You can find out that information on your registrar's website. And again, as we talked before, the way to get that information is on the Department of Elections website, and that is where you could find out where your registrar's office is. If you do have a disability or 65 years or more, you can vote curbside. We've been talking about that. Just make that as a reminder. And as Nicole pointed out, make sure you look for the sign in front of the polling place for where you should park. And there will be a telephone number on a sign there, or there could be, well, not or, there should be also an election officer, if there's enough election officers at that polling place, that might even be there watching for people who park in that location to make sure that they get the service as quickly as possible. And then finally, polls are open in Virginia at every location from 6 a.m. in the morning to 7 p.m. on election day. If you are in line at 7 p.m., you have a right to vote. So next slide, please. So plan ahead and be sure you vote. And the best way to vote is if you plan ahead. We have data that shows that you're 33% more likely to vote if you think ahead and plan. So here are the 5 sort of steps on planning. First is when. Do you want to vote early or do you want to vote on election day? It's up to you totally on what you decide to do. Obviously, if you want to vote early, you ought to vote as early as you feel comfortable voting. You have the accessible voting if it's in person, or if you request your ballot, you can vote right at home. Second, you need to determine where. And again, we were sort of talking about that. You can vote at home through a mailed ballot, or you can vote in person. So who with? You should bring a friend. Particularly if you're going to be, obviously, if you vote in person. One of the things I want to emphasize that you might have heard in the past, if you voted at home, that you had to have a witness to witness your ballot. That is no longer the law. You do not have to do that. And that was something that a lot of people, a lot of organizations, including the League, were pushing hard for, because it was very difficult for many people to find a witness. So you do not need a witness. You can vote at home by yourself. So if you do vote in person, what do you need to bring? You do think about your identification, what kind of identification that you would like, that you can bring. Again, you do have the option to vote even if you don't have an ID, by signing the ID confirmation form. And then finally, how are you going to vote? How are you going to get to the location if you decide you want to vote in person? There are options for you to schedule a ride, reach out to the League. The League has some information on how some I would say not necessarily totally free, but some options on how you can get to your polling site. The parties do that as well. And even your registrar might have a phone number that you could call on election day if you need a ride. So that's something that you should consider. We have here a graphic that the league has put together, emphasizing that one of the ways to make a plan is to go to our vote, VOTE 411.org website. Again, that's VOTE 411, one word, .org website. And that you can get a lot of information what's on your ballot by just putting in your registration address. And we're not entirely up yet because it's still a little bit early before the start of early voting, but by the start of early voting, there will be a lot of information for you to use on making this plan. Next slide, please. If you do have a problem voting, and let's just hope that none of you have this, but there are options available for you. And this slide provides a number of phone numbers, and we'll make this slide available to everyone. It'll be difficult for me to give every single one of these numbers in this particular presentation, but I did want to emphasize that the election protection hotlines have different phone numbers depending on your language. So if you're more comfortable with other languages, you should use the language that you're most comfortable with. Thank you, Carolyn, for repeating that. So that'll be helpful for people who have access to the chat. So it is in English, of course, Spanish, Asian languages, Arabic, and you can even text our vote to 97779. If you have a problem, and you should, if you have any problem at any site, or if you're confused about what you have the rights to have, please reach out to the Election Protection Hotline. Secondly, the National Association of the Deaf Hotline is also available if you have any questions about accessibility or just anything about problems that you feel like you're having trying to vote. And that's ASL-301-818- and it's VOTE or 8683. So next slide, please. So if your rights, if you feel like your voting rights have been violated, you can reach out to these following organizations, and I encourage you to do that because these are the organizations that should be able to help you work through the system. And this is again, the Local Center for Independent Living. This is the organization that Nicole is a part of and gave you a lot of information about what that organization can do for you. There's also the Disability Law Center of Virginia, or DLCV, which is the designated protection and advocacy system for all Virginians with disabilities. And their website is www.dlcv.org. And then finally, the accessibility coordinator at the Virginia Department of Elections is also available to take any sort of concerns that you might have. And they have an email, which is ADAVOTER, which is ADA voter, at elections.virginia.gov. They also have two phone numbers, an 800 phone number, 800-552-9745, a non-800 number, or 804-335-6445, or TTY 711. I think this is the end of my discussion. I just want to send to each and every one of you my and the League's best wishes for an easy, accessible, and successful voting experience in November. And I'll be welcoming any questions that you might have during the Q&A session. And now I'm going to hand it back to Susan Lydick. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Janet. That was so informative. I feel like I learned a lot, even though I thought that I knew most of this. So thank you for the very thorough and clear presentation. We really, Rev Up Virginia really thanks League of Women Voters of Virginia and Basel for your partnership and your being members of the coalition. So we're going to go to questions now. So if all of the presenters will be on camera, and do we have any questions, Kayla?
And we do have one question. Is there a sample ballot at the Department of Elections?
I guess I could answer that. This is Janet Boyd again. At the sample, there really isn't a one ballot at the Department of Elections because every jurisdiction has a different ballot. Not only is there for this particular election, the presidential election, which will be the same for everybody in Virginia. There's also a Senate election, which will be the same for everybody. But once you get below that, even the US congressional elections will be different depending on where you live. And then many localities have their own elections going on at the same time. So the place to get a sample ballot is through your local registrar. And they should have that on their website soon because those elections have pretty much been, all the candidates for those elections have been set. I can also tell you that, as I mentioned before, the League of Women Voters of Virginia does have the website vote411.org. And within a week or so, we should have all the information for all the various elections throughout Virginia that you can get essentially the same as a sample ballot by just putting in your registered address.
Wonderful. And as a reminder, if you do have any questions, please use the chat feature on your screen and you can direct those to the questions host. We do have a couple of questions asking about the recording and wondering if this will be posted on YouTube or any other platforms to share.
This is Susan Leidick. We will be sending out the recording to those who registered for the event. That will likely go out next week. And then once our website, the Rev Up Virginia website is launched, we will be posting it on there. I believe League of Women Voters of Virginia plan to post it on your website, and I don't know about Basel, but certainly we'll make it available to you. We want you to share it with as many people as you can.
Wonderful. And we did have a comment during the presentation that we at the Peninsula Center for Independent Living also process voter registration. So that was made during the presentation. And again, go right ahead.
This is Nicole Davis. Any Center for Independent Living, I'm so thankful that the Peninsula SIL brought that up. So if you want to register to vote, you can also go to your local Centers for Independent Living and they can help you fill and provide that information to you and help assist you with registering as well.
Do we have any other questions, Kayla, or comments?
Not at this time, but again, all questions can be submitted through the chat feature. You can direct those to the questions host, and you may also raise your hand if you would like to ask a verbal question and enable your webcam.
While we're waiting for that, Kayla, how about if we go to the next slide and give me a chance to tell about Disability Voting Rights Week is coming up next week, September 9th through 13th. Rev Up of the American Association of People with Disabilities designates a yearly week where we recognize disability voting rights. And next week, we will be starting out. Here in Virginia, we have a number of events that are planned. We partner up with local community partners to put on these events. Next week, on September 9th, Rev Up Virginia will have a tabling event at John Lewis High School in Springfield, Virginia. High school students there are planning this disability rights event. They are members of the John Lewis Leadership Student Organization. Rev Up Virginia will be there, and we're real proud that League of Women Voters of Fairfax will be there to do registration. We will have students from George Mason University Disability Organization there with us, interacting with students. And then on September 11th at University of Mary Washington, there'll be a tabling event where there'll be educational materials about the disability voting rights. And then on September the 12th, Helena and I will both be at George Mason University for our annual event at George Mason, where we'll have a breakfast with students from the UBU, which is the Student Disability Organization at George Mason, followed by a tabling event where we'll have materials, educational materials. And again, the League of Women Voters of Fairfax will be doing registration. We will also have a accessible voting machine demonstration by the Fairfax County Department of Elections. Then on September 18th, University of Mary Washington is doing another Disability Voting Rights Week event, tabling event. On September 21st, the Center for Independent Living in Fredericksburg, which is called the Disability Resource Center, is having its annual Fall Family Festival at the Fredericksburg Fairgrounds, and they have a Rev Up Virginia tabling materials there. Following that, we're real thankful for the group in Norfolk, Virginia Beach that's doing their September 28th tabling event at the Old Beach Art and Eco Market. And that's in the park, that's in the Vibe area of Virginia Beach, having a tabling event there. Followed by that, on October 4th, the Center for Independent Living on the Eastern Shore is having an event at Eastern Shore Community College in Melfa, Virginia. And the League of Women Voters of Southampton Roads will be doing voter registration. We're real thankful for that. Followed by that, on October 5th, we have a presentation that's going to be at the Families of Autism Coming Together that's in Virginia Beach, and that presentation will be given, I understand, by Unic Cole, is that correct? For the Independence Center in Norfolk. So that's a wonderful presentation about voting rights. Then on October 8th, Rev Up Virginia will again be represented at Christopher Newport University in Newport News. The Wason Center at Newport News is having what they're calling Captain's Vote, an all-campus opportunity for students to understand the importance of voting, have opportunities to register to vote. We will have the League of Women Voters of Williamsburg and the League of Women Voters of Southampton Roads that'll be there to do registration. And Rev Up Virginia will be having a tabling event there. So we're real excited about that. October 9th, we have the ECI, which is again, Nicole Davis's Center for Independent Living is doing another presentation for families of autism coming together about voting rights. And then finally on October 16th, again, ECI, Nicole Davis's Center for Independent Living is doing a presentation for their advisory board on the disability vote. So we have a really full schedule. And we always are looking for new partners. So next year, if your area of the Commonwealth does not have an event, we are looking for partners to partner with us to put on a Disability Voting Rights Week event. And again, it doesn't have to be during Disability Voting Rights Week, which is this year, September 9th through 13th. In fact, as you can see, we're going into October to have events. Rev Up Virginia welcomes anyone to join our coalition. We meet the first Thursday of each month. And again, we'll be meeting tomorrow, actually, 4 p.m. via Zoom. And the Commissioner of Elections, Susan Beal, will be presenting on accessibility of the vote. Want to thank AAPD Rev Up that provided the grant funds that made this this webinar possible, as far as the management company and the ASL and CART. So that's some information. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, because I think we have some more time. So Helena, if there's anything I've missed, please jump in.
Thanks, Susan. The one thing I did want to mention, when you registered, we received your email address. So we will be adding you to our Rev Up Virginia Gmail list. And you will be getting, we do not send out a lot of emails, but you will be receiving communication from us. If you prefer not to, that is fine. When you receive that first communication, just do a reply and say unsubscribe, and we'll be happy to remove you from the list. But we do hope many of you will want to join our effort and continue to grow the power of the disability vote in Virginia.
And we did have one additional question. If there are any ASL video resources that you could refer the participants to, that would be greatly appreciated.
Could the person expound upon that a little bit? I'm not sure that I understand the question or the request.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we can.
Hey there. Thank you so much for this, and thank you for the resource. So the session has been incredibly helpful. I work with lots of different folks who support folks with various support needs. What I'm thinking about is that in providing people, a lot of times people get these information that are like real need-based. So like something that is about registering, and then something else about, voting on election day, versus an hour-long, this is incredible. And a recording of this with the ASL interpreter is going to be incredibly helpful. I just know that it's more likely that people will use something that's more condensed and specific to a need. And so I was wondering if you all were aware of any ASL video resources that would essentially provide folks some of the information that you provided, but around specific needs rather than the whole soup to nuts presentation.
So it's Gray. Do I have that name right? Gray. There is an entity called Sign Vote, SIGNVOTE, and it's at signvote.org. So I would recommend taking a look at their website, because they're focused on providing information on elections, specifically, for the deaf and hard and hearing community. So I think that may be a good resource to check out. And again, it's signvote.org.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
I believe we have one last slide, don't we, Kayla? So here's again our Rev Up Virginia Gmail. It's REVUP Virginia written out, VIRGINIA @gmail.com. Rev Up Virginia has Facebook, Instagram, and X. And then the Virginia Association of Centers for Independent Living, again, is VACIL.org. And then the League of Women Voters of Virginia, the website is my.lwv.org//Virginia. And we appreciate all of our partners and are always looking for new partners in our work. Is there any additional questions or comments?
We did have one just comment that this was a great program, very well organized and informative.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Janet Boyd and Carolyn Kaywood from the League of Women Voters, and Nicole Davis from the ECI, as well as Basel, and our Elizabeth Reese, who worked real hard to help us put this PowerPoint together. And again, Alina and certainly the management company, we really appreciate you and the ASL interpreters today. So if there's nothing else, please enjoy the rest of this beautiful day and keep our thoughts on those folks down in Georgia. Take care and have a good day.
And that concludes today's presentation. You may now disconnect.